Welcome to Sexology, a podcast that untangles the science of sex and pleasure. And now, with this week's episode, your host, clinical psychologist, Dr. Nazanin Moali.
Hello there. Welcome to Sexology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nazanin Moali. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to remind you that now you can record your questions in our podcast website, which is sexologypodcast.com. There is this blue tab that says Ask Your Questions from Dr. M, and I'll try to answer as many of them as possible in our future shows. Depending on the number of the questions, I might dedicate the entire episode to them, or I'm just going to record the bonus ones as we go. Again, I love to hear from you. So don't be shy and record your questions in our podcast website. Today, we're going to talk about, as I said, sexual jealousy, and our guest is Dr. Elizabeth Bonet. Shortly after earning her PhD in 1998, Dr. Bonet left the field of psychology to pursue a technical career. She worked in tech for many years, doing project management and launching the first website to do online trading of international securities. She then left that field to be a stay-at-home mom and entrepreneur, growing her prenatal yoga business into an award-winning company. Dr. Bonet returned to the field of psychology in 2008. She opened her own private practice located in Fort Lauderdale area in Hollywood, Florida in 2010. As a certified hypnotherapist with a PhD in clinical psychology, Dr. Bonet helped people feel more emotionally stable, happier, and more connected to their partner, friends, and loved ones of their choosing. Specialties are hypnosis for anxiety reduction and chronic conditions, couple counseling, and prenatal mood disorders. You can also check out her podcast. It's fantastic. It calls Hypnotize Me. She launched it in 2016, which has over 20,000 downloads and is listened to in over 70 countries. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Bonet. Welcome to another episode of Sexology Podcast. I'm super excited for our guest today. As I mentioned during the introduction, we have Dr. Elizabeth Bonet. She is an author, she's a psychologist, she's a fellow podcaster. She's such an accomplished person that I was just sharing with her that I was wow with reading her bio. Dr. Elizabeth, welcome to our show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I follow your podcast for a long time, so I was quite happy to get an invite.
Oh, thank you. Same with your podcast. It has such an interesting topic, and definitely I want to make sure that people kind of understand about that and know about it for sure, because it's on hypnosis, right?
Yes, it's called Hypnotize Me, and it's all about hypnosis.
Awesome. And I know that we talked about a little bit about how we're going to tie that to the topic today. So absolutely stay tuned. We're going to talk about it. So I guess it's a little bit of a preview for our listeners. So let's start with talking about sexual jealousy. I find this topic very fascinating because many of the couples that come into my practice, big part of them, there are struggles around sexual jealousy, and they're telling me how they feel kind of ashamed about that. So do you think is sexual jealousy natural?
Yes, absolutely. I do. I have the same experience. I'm Gottman trained level 1, and I do see couples and specialized in marriage and family for a long time. And sexual jealousy is a big factor. I'm surprised to hear that you say that they feel ashamed, though. In the couples I've seen, it's almost been like it's a given, like, of course I'm going to be jealous. And then we have to talk about that some and work with it and see what's happening there. So that is interesting. How do you see the shame come up?
So I think that was an excellent point. So some of the couples I see, they kind of want to explore polyamory. They are in open relationships, so they think they kind of navigated that. And then they kind of say, oh my God, this is a real issue for me. And then they feel shameful about, I made this arrangement and now I'm feeling shameful about it.
Oh, very interesting. And that makes complete sense. So yeah, I see more couples in closed marriages, like monogamous marriages, but definitely when you get into open and polyamorous, my experience has been there's often this theoretical in their mind, like, yeah, let's do this. And they even research it and that type of thing. But then when you get to the actuality of it, like, what is this really like for you as the couple? Then absolutely jealousy comes right up. Yeah. Right. And it doesn't always match what they thought it would be like.
Absolutely. Yes. And sometimes they're telling me that, like, as you said, on theory, I have all these things that the way I'm going to do it, certain ways I'm going to do this, I'm going to navigate it this way. And when the circumstances kind of change, they feel this strong feeling of sexual jealousy. So, but you're absolutely right. I see it in monogamous couple all the time as well. There is, because of arrangement, they might not necessarily feel shameful about it. As you mentioned, they were thinking that was part of our agreement. So what's going on?
Yes, exactly. Whereas like an open marriage, it's more like, there's a shouldn't in there, right? That creates the shame. Right. Like, you shouldn't be jealous. Like, we agreed to do this, right?
Right.
Versus like a closed marriage, it's like, no, we agreed it's just us. And now I'm jealous of potential. Or sometimes there's an affair that goes on. And of course, that's a whole different animal as well. But it's often this possessive jealousy and this anxious jealousy. Like, what if she leaves me for somebody else? And so then I'm going to control her in this way and this way and this way. So yeah, it presents very differently. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I see sometimes the opposite of what we just discussed, that the partner coming in and she or he says, like, he or she is not jealous. What's wrong with him? He doesn't like me. So I had certainly had the other way of like kind of talking, exploring about it, because they think their partner, maybe they don't desire them. That's why they're not jealous.
So interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen couples with that as much as the other, but yeah, I mean, there's an aspect too of occasionally a partner will try to create jealousy so that they can feel valued, right? And that's generally like game playing, quote unquote, is what we call that, which isn't really healthy for a marriage, right, at all. But it is the sense of, if I create this, and I'll know that they really love me.
Right. And I know it is just, as you said, it's very normal, regardless of the arrangement you have in your marriage or relationship, to feel jealousy. So what do you think, what are the function of emotional and sexual jealousy, if we want to think about it through like lens of evolution and other factors?
Yeah, it has been studied and studied and studied across all kinds of cultures. It is across all kinds of generations, and pretty much it's pretty agreed. It's a robust effect now that jealousy is pretty normal. It has an evolutionary basis in terms of protecting your resource, right? Like for the woman, the resource of the male that's going to provide for her and provide for that child, and for the male of, okay, I'm putting, I don't want to support a child that's not mine. Right. But I do want to say too, to be inclusive here, that they've studied jealousy less in same-sex couples, but it is still very much functions almost the same as in heterosexual couples. So homosexual couples are more alike than different from heterosexual couples when it comes to jealousy. So you still have the same effect. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I can see that there are definitely parallels and there are some differences, as you mentioned, but I think it's human nature to see, like, if someone wants what you have, then it brings up so much emotion. So that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. And I think too, as homosexual marriage becomes more legalized, I know podcasts are listened to all over the world. So it just varies from country to country. And different areas. But as it becomes more legalized, then they're seeing jealousy like even more. So it's like, oh, okay, now there's this partner who's mine, quote unquote, right? Because of the marriage.
Right.
So what they found is that emotional infidelity is more of a threat, particularly for lesbian couples, versus like physical infidelity, sexual, is more of a threat for gay men. So it's really interesting when you start to break it down between the different types as well. Like emotional infidelity and someone having an emotional affair with someone and losing time and attention is the threat there, versus sexual, like someone has had an affair or the partner's fantasizing that they're going to have an affair.
Right. And I always find this study is so fascinating because they find different kind of like some subgroup, they have like they struggle with one kind of jealousy versus others. So yeah, that's interesting that he says, in lesbian couples, it's more emotional, and in gay couples are more sexual. Yeah, and I know they say that about women and men too. I know I was in college and one of the classes saying women are more sensitive on emotional jealousy. But I'm thinking that for me, the sexual jealousy is more painful. Like if my husband is sexually involved with someone else, it breaks my heart more. If he's emotionally involved with someone else, I guess part of it's what kind of meaning you associate with that.
Yes, I think it is the kind of meaning you associate. And definitely women are threatened more by emotional affairs than men are in heterosexual couples as well. So they're threatened more by like physical attractiveness or dominance, like a rival's dominance, quote unquote, and it's like there's all kinds of ways to define that. But it's basically if they're threatened more by that, then the women are like emotional. And they're also threatened by physical attractiveness as well. But it's not this sense of that woman is more accomplished this and this than me, like it is for men.
Oh, I see. How do you define dominance?
Yeah, I don't really. It's really a perceptual thing.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that.
Yeah, it really is. It's how the man perceives it. So some of that is accomplishment. Some of that is physical size. Like I think the research studies break it down all kinds of different ways, but in general, they group it into quote unquote a man who looks like they're more accomplished, can provide better from an evolutionary sense, like all of this stuff that goes into it. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I know sometimes, when I work with my female clients, they're with this wonderful providing partner, and they tell me about how much they crave that raw image of masculinity and dominance. And so that's very interesting, I think, as far as like I want to explore that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. It really is, because that is what would be the most threatening, right? To their own partner if they're craving that kind of thing.
Right. I find all those things. I can talk about them for hours, but I'm just kind of curious. I know, as you mentioned, in relationships, people experience it differently. So what are some of the manifestation of jealousy in relationships?
Oh my gosh. All kinds of stuff like possessiveness, not wanting their partner to do things, be out in the world, like controlling, trying to control their partner's behavior. Anger comes up, of course, right?
Right.
It comes out all kinds of different ways. Sometimes you get into a partner who's stalking their own partner to make sure jealousy doesn't happen. I mean, it's really important, because there was some study done in Baltimore, and this was like 50 years ago or something, but it was like it can lead to real physical violence. So they looked at, I think it was 36 murder cases, and out of which happened domestically, and 26 of them or 27 of them were due to jealousy.
Oh, so wow.
Someone killed the other partner, and it's just shocking, but that's often what will happen if it's, there's a lot of factors that go into that. I'm not saying like anyone who's jealous is going to end up there. Not at all. Okay.
Right. Let's hope not. Okay.
Yeah, but it can lead to violence in relationships depending on what's going on. And it certainly can lead to controlling behavior and possessiveness and this feeling of distrust in the relationship. It actually creates distrust. So it generally does the opposite of what the partner wants it to do. So the partner who's jealous is thinking, I'm going to get everything I need here if they'll just do this, right?
Right.
And really that it creates exactly the opposite. It creates hate. There's a famous quote from a British sexologist, Havelock Ellis. It says, "Jealousy is that dragon which slays love under the pretense of keeping it alive."
Oh, that is so fascinating. I haven't heard of this one. Yeah.
Yeah. So it destroys relationships. People do leave partnerships because of jealousy if it gets too extreme.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel, as you were talking about, can kind of the feeling of distrust can impact relationship, impair their level of intimacy. For example, one of my clients, she was telling me that how her husband got, throughout the time, more suspicious and more jealous. And so again, the feeling part of it, I think just you can have your feeling. It's not a big deal. We all have range of feeling, but how we're acting is can be really problematic. Even in therapy, she was telling me, I'm thinking he's recording me. And this woman, I worked with her in the past. She doesn't have paranoia or anything like that. But she was so she's seen so many unhelpful and scary behaviors from her partner that now she was thinking that she was getting monitored all the time, and that led to their divorce.
Yeah, I completely believe it. Right. If you feel like your life is not your own, that someone does not trust you, past the door, even in your own house, they're checking on you, they're recording you, nobody wants to live like that.
Right. And I think it can kill desire if you're feeling control. I mean, if that's not part of your arousal template, if you're feeling that someone is trying to limit you versus thinking about, okay, my partner is desirable. He has all these options, but he or she chooses to be with me. So I think it's definitely different.
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
So what do you think, is there a distinction between competitiveness and jealousy? Because many people make some similarity between those two.
Yes. So competitiveness, I think, is a factor, particularly when you're looking at men and dominance, right? And thinking, okay, I've got to be more dominant than him, or in that type of relationship, right? But it's also pursuit of a target, right? It's pursuit of something. And jealousy often happens when the target's been obtained. The person is theirs.
Right.
But the other partner is unsure they can hold on to that person. So it's okay, I've got her. She's mine, but I don't know if I can hold on to her. So now jealousy starts going on. And this is in a committed relationship. There's certainly jealousy that goes on before people reach that stage. And competitiveness in that framework is part of it. Can I win? Can I get this person? Can I get her to be mine or him to be mine? It's male or female, they both experience jealousy. I'm just using the male to female for an easy way to talk about it.
Right. And I think with jealousy, with at least the way I look at it, with competitiveness, necessarily there's not this negative self-critical voice usually involved with it. But with jealousy, there is just based on my experience, there's some negative critical voice that's saying that maybe she's better than you. So there's this competition, but there's this comparison. And usually people see themselves sometimes less than this potential partner. So that's also I see as part of it.
Definitely. I mean, the root of jealousy is really a self-esteem problem. It's, am I good enough? And not really believing that, am I good enough for this person? He or she has chosen me, but how do I make sure that I'm good enough? Maybe I'm not. And then that whole cycle starts.
Absolutely. And I think partly it's something that comes from within, as you mentioned, that I work with couples that their partner continuously reassure them that he or she is the one and they're invested in this relationship. But because of sometimes the early ruptures they experience, their attachment style, it's really challenging for them to believe that this relationship, this attachment is secure and they're potentially not necessarily any other threat to that relationship.
Yes. Attachment is definitely an issue here. Attachment style, early attachment, the attachments they had, if they were unstable attachments, insecure attachments, then you're going to carry that forward into your grown-up relationships, into your adult relationships. Personality style is a factor. So they do know there's people that are more like trait jealous, sort of like, someone it's very similar to someone who's more anxious in general, right? So we have some friends that are pretty chill and laid back and they don't get anxious that much. And then we have some friends that are more high strung and they're anxious about all kinds of stuff. And then people vary along that scale. They found the same thing with jealousy. So there's some people who are more prone to it. They call it trait jealousy versus jealousy that may arise just from a situation or a moment, and then it's resolved and it's gone. So that's definitely a factor. Level of trust in the relationship is a factor. So sometimes the partner will do something to make it worse. It's not just a one-directional kind of effect. There is a dynamic going on there. There is the coupleship that's happening. So that's a factor. Length of the relationship, like how long someone's been together, is a factor, meaning like the longer you're together, often the less jealousy you feel and more secure you feel. But it also depends on the dynamic of the relationship. So if you have, let's say you're in a marriage that you may have been married 20 years and it still doesn't feel secure. Like you still have all kinds of conflict that come up and then you can't resolve, and it doesn't feel like a happy marriage, quote unquote, like all these different factors. Well, then you're going to feel more jealousy, let's say, in that one than one where it's like, no, we know we're both happily married, very committed to each other. We're in this for the long haul. So that's a factor as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Absolutely. I think attachment, as you said, it's really important because I see that sometimes children, the way they perceived the family dynamic, they had to kind of compete for their primary caregiver's attention and love, and they didn't experience it as something that was like unconditional. So they had to work for earning it. And I love that you were talking about how it depends on the quality of the relationship. I know that I have worked with people that they were in a certain relationship and it was just like this back and forth of lack of trust and all these fights and there were challenges, and they were absolutely fine in another relationship because of the changes in the dynamic. But also I think big part of it I see, as you said, it can be the self-esteem challenge. So I had people that say, okay, the issue is my partner, and they end the relationship. And in the next relationship, because it's part of their personality traits, they see the same kind of pattern rises.
Yes. Yeah, there is the personality factors in it. And you're right, it does depend on the dynamic of the relationship. One person could be in one relationship and jealousy is not that much of a factor. Maybe it pops up from time to time, but it's not this ever-present thing. Whereas they get into another one and it is an ever-present thing. And some of that is the dynamics there and how the partner reacts. And do they reassure? Do they not? It just all, it's so fascinating that it really depends on how the two people communicate about this and how their love for each other like develops around this, right? Like it really can be, a partner has a huge influence on that, but it's not all dependent on the partner. It's like you bring into it yourself all these different aspects of it. And sometimes you do get someone who truly is controlling in every relationship, and jealousy is a factor in every relationship. And then you have to start looking at, okay, what's going on here that is creating this pattern Like, what are you doing and what's going on inside? And let's look at not just behaviors, feelings, let's look at the whole picture here, all of that. Because jealousy isn't just the feeling, it's the behavior that goes with it too. It's that, acting it out on your partner almost, right? Like making requests of your partner. And sometimes partners can rationally talk about it and talk about their feelings, and they come to an agreement about it and everybody's reassured and they go on. And sometimes they can't do that. They need the help of a therapist, or they need the help of a friend, or they come to it sometimes on their own, or sometimes they can't do it. It continues to be a problem and a pain point for the relationship.
Right. So is it possible to get rid of it? How do you and I know you talked about potentially with hypnosis and like couples work. So how do you usually address it in therapy?
Well, the hypnosis that I do, I think that we talked about was more around like heartbreak and jealousy.
Right.
So when heartbreak happens, that's a whole nother picture. So I'm going to talk about that briefly, and then I'll come back to what you can do in a coupleship together. Like, how do you, or if you're coming in an individual saying, I'm a really jealous person, I don't know what to do here, but I know this has to be fixed, right?
Right.
So with heartbreak, the focus there is on releasing that partner. And that means blocking everything you can. Okay, talk about when we throw social media into the mix with jealousy, it's like a storm, okay? We can put a curse word on the front of that. It's like a shitstorm, right?
Right.
Like social media makes everything worse in terms of jealousy. And it is a real effect. They have studied this many times. And it's something like 66% of people have checked their partner's like private messages on social media. And the other 33% are described as like patiently waiting for the right opportunity.
That's funny.
Yeah, right? So it is a real effect. But when you're talking about a heartbreak and letting go of that jealousy is almost always like primary when someone has broken up. Like, oh my God, they're going to be with somebody else, right? Like that is straight up jealousy. So the recommendation there is block absolutely everything. Block them on Facebook, delete the texts, delete pictures, or put them in a buried folder on your laptop that you can't access easily. Try to really make a clean break there. To decrease jealousy. And then hypnosis can go in, and it's very much like, let's look at the trauma going on, the grief process. So the grief process of not just losing a partner, but losing the dreams that you had together. Like perhaps you had all these plans together, and those aren't going to happen now. So it's a grief process of that. And also releasing some of those jealous feelings, like, let's focus on you here, and increasing your self-worth and self-esteem so that, that person isn't the only person in the world that can make you feel good, right? Like that's what it boils down to on some level. Like that's not the only fish in the sea here. There are plenty of others.
I like that abundance mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you start to look at it from an individual level or in couples, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do, and there's overlap there, right? When you're talking about developing your own self and stop comparing yourself to others, because jealousy is often comparison. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not as good as her, or I'm not as good as him, and what if they leave me for her, or what if they leave me for him, or it's that kind of thing. So working on your own growth, your own worth, the thought of I'm not good unless someone loves me. So sometimes it goes into that arena of, no, you are worthy, period, on your own. Like we live in such a coupleship culture, and this is around the world, obviously for biological and evolutionary reasons, right? But it's coming into this ownership of like, you don't have to be coupled to feel good about yourself. Like even if this person did leave you, you're still worthy. That that may not be about you. So let's work on you. Let's work on you feeling good about yourself and feeling like you have something to offer, not just your partner, but the world. Like meaning, what kind of meaning do you have in your life? What kind of service do you do? So all of that can help in terms of an individual. When you're talking about couples, then communication is really important. Like, let's communicate about this. Let's talk about guidelines for how we want to interact in the world. So you encourage trust in each other, but with guidelines. So it's like, all right, one of the highest risk categories for affairs is an old lover from like high school that they connect with on like Facebook or something, okay, right. Or some kind of social media. Very high risk category for affairs. So a couple may say, okay, look, my private messages are open. They're open to each other. Or if you're contacted by someone who could be at risk to the relationship, whether if that's in a heterosexual relationship, the opposite sex, or a homosexual relationship, it's like, nope, an old lover or someone like that, then we talk about that and we share that. Or there's guidelines around, it's okay to write them a note and say, hey, how are you doing? Nice to hear from you. But, I've been married for 7 years and we don't really have relationships outside of our marriage, right. Setting a firm limit, right? And the indication to that person contacting them, like, my marriage is my priority. Some couples, their agreements are that their profile pictures are of them as a couple instead of just single.
Right.
So that sends a strong message right there. Like, it's either them as a couple or them with their kids. Right there, it's a visual cue to everybody else. This is my primary relationship. So some of them make those kinds of agreements. So, creating rituals together, like eating together, doing things outside of, like, in the real world. It sort of sounds ridiculous because, you like live together, right? And you spend the whole night together. But so much of that time is spent on computers and phones and, involved in the virtual world. So it's making agreements to put that virtual world away some. Like, we're not going to live our whole lives there. We're going to interact with each other in real time, meaning we're going to have dinner every night, or we're going to do a meditation together in the morning, or we run together, whatever that looks like for the couple. So that's a good one as well. Let's see. Building that part of yourself that knows that you would be okay if you lost them. Right? So that's a hard one. People don't like to hear that. They say, like, I would be devastated if I lost them. My life would be over. I can't even imagine it, right? And those are good, strong love feelings. Like, yes, like, we know you're bonded and attached to this person. But if you're having problems with jealousy, the flip side of that is, all right, let's work on the part of yourself that would be okay even if something happened to them. And that may be that you lose the partner in all kinds of ways. Loss can happen. So it's developing that part of the ego, really saying, okay, you have some ego strength here that you're going to be okay in the world without them. So that gets more into ego work for some therapists. Hypnosis can be helpful in terms of that, but it's going a little bit deeper though than just this the more surface level of behaviors, right? Like, let's do X, Y, and Z together.
Is it about accessing the unconscious? Is that part of hypnosis?
Definitely for hypnosis, accessing the unconscious. Yeah. And going back and doing some healing. So I talked about inner child healing on another podcast, Women in Depth. I know we're both fans of that podcast.
Right.
Lourdes Viado, she's excellent. And I talked some about the inner child healing. So some of this is going back into that. It is like saying, okay, perhaps your attachment was not the best. It was insecure with your mom or your dad or whoever that was for you, or something happened, or you had siblings that your parents always tried to split, right? Meaning, like, one child was a favorite child and perhaps that wasn't you, and you always had to compete, or you always had to compete for something, right? Not even like there's a favorite child. There's a story my ex-husband tells of these two friends of his. And it's two boys, about 2 years apart. And they were eating dinner, and my ex-husband had 4 boys in his family. So there's 4 brothers, and they're all growing up, and there's a lot of competition for food. That's what he always said. Right?
I can believe that. That's the same with my husband too.
Right. And at one point, these 2 brothers, one actually stabbed the other with the fork in the hand because he was reaching for food that he thought it was his. Right. So. Yeah, I have no idea what the parents did at that point, right? But it's you could imagine that might be the person who then acts out his jealousy later. That's okay for me to do something,
right,
about my jealousy versus all right, let's talk about this. There's plenty of food for everybody, there's plenty of food. Everybody's going to get fed here. So hypnosis can go back to some of those early experiences where perhaps there wasn't enough food for everybody, or perhaps there wasn't enough love for everybody. People grow up in all kinds of circumstances that don't provide what they need as little children. And not even saying it's the parents' fault. It's not often. Sometimes it's circumstance that happens. But yeah, you can go back and do some of that work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love that. And the other part of that is kind of, as you were mentioning, that it's wonderful to have this, communicate these things, your boundaries with your partner, but also being comfortable with your feelings and what you want. Because sometimes, for example, I work with this young professional woman, and one of them, she was telling with me that she loves the image of that she has about she's carefree, she's cool, she seems like there is the image that she wants people to see her as she doesn't care, she doesn't feel threatened. And she in this particular relationship that she had, it was very painful for her to watch and see that her partner, and they had this they were in this non-committed relationship. She was saying that it was so painful for her to see her partner with someone else, but she wasn't comfortable speaking up because that would impact her image of being this carefree young woman.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think the younger generations, I'm in my 40s, so the generations in their 20s, it's almost par for course is what I've heard, at least in the US, in terms of colleges, where it's no, it's somehow the shameful thing to say, I want to be committed. I just want you.
Right.
I want to be in a relationship with just you. That somehow you're not supposed to say that, or it conflicts with the other side of yourself that just wants to be seen as carefree and open and accepting. And so you'd have to do work there, right, around accepting, there's all kinds of parts of ourselves, and sometimes they express themselves this way, and sometimes they express themselves this way. But let's integrate those. Right.
And just, as you said, kind of accepting who you are, your feeling, and kind of, as you said, putting it kind of integrated to your personality and the stories. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that. I noticed we're toward the end of our time, and I know you have a wonderful podcast and also different resources. And I'm sure many of our listeners would like to contact you. So what would be the best way of contacting you?
I'm at drlizhypnosis.com. So it's a DRLIZ hypnosis.com. And that you can find hypnosis information. You can find the podcast there, downloads, all kinds of stuff is there. My blog, my YouTube video, I've got it all covered.
Yay. Make sure I leave it in the show notes, and I highly recommend people to check out your podcast, and also you have lots of great content. So I think that would be good. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yes, you're welcome.
All
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye. I hope you found our discussion helpful about sexual jealousy. There was so much more content that we could have covered, but unfortunately, we ran out of time. So I just wanted to remind you that it's okay if you're experiencing sexual jealousy. It's at a certain degree, it's normal. We all are experiencing it from time to time. It's a matter of how you choose to act on it, and reactions you're having to this sexual jealousy. Is it improving the relationship or getting in the way of getting closer to your partner. And it's important to remember that like healthy relationship entails seeing your partner as a separate individual with rights to be independent and free. And in order for you to be in a really healthy relationship, it's important for both of the partner and you to support each other to live and flourish. Because sometimes when our partner or we are possessive, or the possessive one, it can limit our worldview and it can harm our relationship. So I guess these are a few things to think about. And if you have any thoughts and reaction to this episode, you can email me or you can follow us and contact us on our social media, which is at Oasis2Care. It's Oasis number 2 Care. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening to the Sexology Podcast. For more great content, visit www.sexologypodcast.com. Please be advised that information presented on this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health provider.